What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? Dbacks get walked off by the Toronto Blue Jays. If the Dbacks are serious about 2025, it's time to trade for a reliever right now.
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? Always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas, multimedia journalist and graphic designer. So please go check out my website, MillardThomas24diamondportfolio.com. On there, you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. On today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, we're going to be discussing that frustrating loss to the Toronto Blue Jays. Can the D-backs get back to the wildcard race just based off the rest of June? And then can Erod keep the momentum going and a potential bounce back in Game 2 in Toronto? So whole bunch I want to talk to you guys about on today's podcast, but first want to say thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. One of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. It's an interactive show. I try to go live Sunday through Thursday after D-backs games. So if you're watching it live, drop a comment down in the YouTube comment section. I'll read it on air as the show's going on. Again, it's interactive, so don't be afraid to drop a comment and have a conversation. If you want to know when I go live, just follow me on social media at CreatorThomas24 for the personal account, or look up Locked on Diamondbacks on both Twitter and Instagram for the podcast handle, or hit that little bell icon next to the subscribe button so you get notified when I go live. But now let's jump into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. Back here on the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. And before we start the show, if you're watching this on YouTube, check this out. We got our own merch, Locked on Diamondbacks podcast t-shirt. I got it today. I'm so hyped to be wearing it on air for you guys right now. But unfortunately, I wish I was putting this t-shirt on after a big D-backs win, because it felt like we were on our way to a close D-backs victory where the offense barely squeaks by enough runners. The bullpen dances a tightrope, but able to get out of it. But sadly, none of that happens because Shelby Miller, who is supposed to be the one good reliever that the D-backs have, the one trustworthy reliever that Arizona has, you can't trust anyone in this pen, because Shelby Miller gave up 2 home runs in the 9th inning to tie it up, and then for the Blue Jays to walk it off. And just straight demoralizing, just rips the heart out of your chest when you watch a game like today where it wasn't the best D-backs game. This was a sloppy D-backs game for most of the game and from most of the players and different parts of this unit, because the starting pitching by Brandon Pfaadt today, it wasn't great. It wasn't perfect. I thought he did enough to put his team in line for the victory, but it was another start where Brandon Pfaadt didn't have that fastball command. You watched him. Brandon Pfaadt right now just struggling to throw strikes, struggling to really put away dudes. That's been the biggest concern, I guess, for Pfaadt this year. This was a guy in the minor leagues who was a strikeout machine, over 200 strikeouts in the minors. It was like one of the best strikeout seasons we've seen from a pitching prospect. He's coming up to the big leagues. His first couple of years, he was a good strikeout pitcher, but this year, the numbers have fell off the table in terms of his strikeout rate. Today was at least another step in the right direction from where he was in that national start, but he still doesn't look like that first month Brandon Pfaadt. And the D-backs really could have used Brandon Pfaadt giving them some length today, knowing the bullpen is so bad If your starter is only going to go 5 innings, the D-backs are going to struggle to win games because their pen is not good enough. And Fott, he was fine today. He did enough to put his team in position to win, but it wasn't like it was a great Brandon Fott start. It was just good enough to put the D-backs in position to win. The offense wasn't great either. I really like their approach to Chris Bassett. A lot of their ABs today. I thought early in the game, Chris Bassett was getting after these D-backs hitters, but as the game went on, it felt like Chris Bassett was leaving stuff hanging up a part of the zone. I thought the D-backs hitters were locked in on it. They just couldn't. They just didn't always execute on the high level, at least when it came to situational hitting, as they were, what were they, 3 for 12 with runners in scoring position tonight. But like sometimes they just got under it a little bit too much. But I really like the at-bats by the D-backs offense tonight. They just didn't execute on a high level. The D-backs defense tonight, I mean, again, it made the plays, but how many times did Lourdes Gurriel almost run into another D-backs player, right? Like the D-backs starting pitching, the defense, the bullpen to the 9th inning, like you were holding your breath throughout most of the game, but the D-backs kept coming out on the other side until the 9th inning when Shelby Miller gave up those 2 home runs and the D-backs lost the game, of course. And the bullpen is just, you have no confidence from your bullpen. And if you're a D-back starter, it puts so much pressure on you because maybe that's why Brandon Fott's starting to struggle, because he knows if he doesn't go 6-7 innings every time, his team has no chance. And in the first month of the season, Brandon Fott was giving us that length repeatedly. Now, if he goes 5 innings, we're pretty happy about it. But from a team perspective, it doesn't really help us because we need length from our starters because our pen is so bad. And if the D-backs are serious about 2025 and trying to stay in this wild card race, they need to address their problems right now. D-backs do not have time to wait until the deadline, as I keep hammering on this podcast. This D-backs bullpen is too atrocious to wait that long. Kyle Backus, he's a dude. We love the way he did today. Backus should potentially be moved to the 8th inning or maybe the 7th inning because Juan Murillo struck out the side in the 8th. Juan always makes you hold your breath, but with how he pitched tonight, maybe Juan Murillo is now the 8th inning guy. Maybe Kyle Backus is the 7th inning guy. However you divvy it up, you cannot have Ryan Thompson in anymore. Again, inherited, runner scored. It gets charged to Jalen Beeks. It makes him look like the bad reliever tonight. No, Ryan Thompson absolutely cooked. And the sad part is it's like Taylor Scott's cooked. Who else do we have? We have like one other reliever who's also cooked, right? So it's like Ryan Thompson's maybe like the 3rd or 4th worst D-backs reliever, which is like saying something. Ryan Thompson's so bad, 5.33 ERA, never has those shutdown innings, comes in with a runner on. Of course, that guy scores. It's like Ryan Thompson was so important to what the D-backs did in 2023, so critical to that postseason run. But there's a reason he was a waiver wire pickup. And now it's probably time to get back on the waiver wire and look for some new pitchers that could potentially help out this D-backs team because this bullpen is not going to take us anywhere. And it's frustrating to see the D-backs just giving games away because they can't close out games. And Shelby Miller, to answer DeMar DeRozan fans' question, who do you think the closer should be now? Sadly, DeMar DeRozan fan, it's probably still going to be Shelby Miller because you don't have a better option. You're going Kyle Backus? You're going Juan Murillo? Probably not right now. Jalen Beeks? Probably not. So as sad as the walk-off was, it's still probably Shelby Miller in the back end of the D-backs bullpen as the closer going forward. D-backs need to address the bullpen. They need to go get relievers right now because the season, I mean, it's already been up and down here and it could really spiral out of control if we don't address our biggest issues right now. Now we'll discuss if the D-backs, maybe they don't need to trade for anyone. Maybe all they need to do is just handle their business after this Toronto Blue Jays series. And we'll talk about that easy June schedule in segment number 2. But hey, I first want to talk to you guys about Trade Coffee because let's be real. Coffee isn't just a drink. It's a ritual. It's a lifeline. The thing that gets you from half asleep to fully functioning. And if it's that essential, Why settle for anything less than amazing? That's where Trade Coffee comes in. Trade is the #1 coffee destination in the US, delivering fresh, incredible coffee from over 50 of the country's top roasters. Whether you're a cold brew fan or a pour over purist, they've got a roast you'll love. Right now, Trade is exclusively offering our customers 50% off your 1 month trial at drinktrade.com/lockedonmlb. That's TRADE.com/lockedonmlb for 50% off your 1 month trial at drinktrade.com/lockedonmlb. All right, back here on the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. Now let's talk about that June schedule. And I gotta admit, when I did these podcast notes, it was like entering the final inning where I thought the D-backs were going to win. And so I had this whole segment one plan where I was like, D-backs didn't look great today, but they're finding ways to win. They're finally on the other side of these dumb losses where they didn't look their best, but they found little ways to win. Sadly, that didn't happen because it went the other way. It was classic D-backs, bullpen blowing it. And so this segment number 2 feels like it doesn't hit as hard after a D-backs loss, but the D-backs can finish this series strong, hopefully win the next 2 games against Toronto Blue Jays. You do a little sneak peek at the rest of June. I don't know how many of you listeners like to look ahead when it comes to the baseball schedule or just in life in general. I don't know if you like to look ahead, in your personal life, look at the calendar. Maybe that gives you a level of anxiety. Oh my God, I don't want to look at December 2025 right before the new year. That gives me a level of anxiety. So I don't blame you there. But I can't deny when you look at the rest of the schedule for June for the Arizona Diamondbacks, you handle your business in this series against the Toronto Blue Jays. And on paper, you should win out the rest of the month. Now, again, that's easier said than done. How many times have the D-backs played a mediocre team and lost this season? More times than we can count, right? The D-backs are a team that doesn't always, outplay the level of competition that they should be outplaying, right? Sometimes they stoop down to their competition's level, which is not something you want to see, especially if you're a team like struggling in the wild card race, trying to stay, within your own division as well, because we know how stacked the top of the division is in the NOS. And so far, the D-backs have struggled and not struggled against teams below 500 this season. And we've seen them against like the Washington Nationals, right? Get absolutely destroyed. Why do the D-backs suck against the Nationals this year? I have no idea, but they just do. The Cincinnati Reds, they're not a bad team this year. They're in the wild card mix, but they swept the Arizona Diamondbacks. You know who else is 3-0 against the D-backs in 2025? The Miami Marlins. So you can't just say the D-backs are going to go in these series and I take that back. The Marlins are not 3-0 against the D-backs. The D-backs are 3-0 against the Marlins. I was looking at the schedule backwards. So I apologize there. But the Nationals are 4-2 against the D-backs. They are not a great team. They just lost 10 games in a row. The Rockies haven't lost 10 games in a row all season. And so we know the D-backs can lose to bad teams. The Pirates are 2-1 against the D-backs in 2025. Maybe I should have used those as examples instead of the Miami Marlins. So the D-backs don't always outplay the level of competition that they should outplay. But if the D-backs are serious about getting into the postseason mix and getting to the playoff mix, you look at the rest of June and you say, this is the time to do that. Because let me look at the MLB standings. Again, I took these notes before the podcast started when the D-backs looked like they were going to be 2.5 games back of a wild card. D-backs are currently 3.5 games back of a wild card with me recording this, with the Dodgers up 8-5 over the San Diego Padres. And it's like, if the D-backs have a good series against the Blue Jays, you win the next 2 games. You have to win the next 2 games. If you do that, you could potentially be like, 2.5 games back of a wild card spot, maybe like 3 games back, whatever. If that's the case, if you're like 2-3 games back of a wild card and you're starting to look at the rest of June, it's very easy to convince yourself we might actually own a wild card spot by the time we get to the end of the month. It sounds insane with how up and down this D-back season has been, how much of a roller coaster ride it's been, how emotionally draining it's been as well. But there is a real possibility we look up, it's June 17th. We could look up in 2 weeks and say, how do the D-backs own the third wild card right now with 2 weeks until the All-Star break? It sounds insane to even think about, sounds insane to say out loud, but it's a real possibility because first of all, the D-backs quietly do own some tiebreakers. I know I harp on the D-backs losing to so many National League teams in the first half of the year, but they actually do own tiebreakers over the San Diego Padres. Well, let me double check because I was getting the schedule confused a second ago. Yeah, the D-backs are 2-1 against the Giants this year, and they're 2-1 against the San Diego Padres, and they're even 2-1 against the Brewers. So three teams directly ahead of the D-backs in the standings. They currently own the tiebreaker over. Of course, it's not the end of the season, so there's still time for that to flip-flop. But for at least the next couple of weeks, at least for the month of June, if the D-backs get hot and they tie with one of those teams, the wildcard race, they will leapfrog them in the standings, which will at least make us feel good on paper. And then outside of the tiebreakers, when you actually look at the schedule, not to be disrespectful, but on paper, it should be a cake schedule the rest of the way. Next, after the Blue Jays, the D-backs face the Colorado Rockies. The only respect I give to the Rockies is that they're in the NL West. This is a team that plays Arizona a ton. They already had a game this year where the D-backs scored double-digit runs and lost to the Colorado Rockies. So you can never overlook a team in your division. So I will give the Rockies at least that respect, but fire their manager this season. And of course, they are perpetually playing for the number one pick. Terrible franchise. And then after the Rockies, you play another terrible franchise in the Chicago White Sox. Right now, the Rockies and the White Sox are like in a battle for who can have the worst record of all time. Last season, it was the White Sox. This year might be the Colorado Rockies. White Sox, you can make the argument, have the worst owner in sports. Jerry Reinsdorf, he owns the White Sox. He owns the Chicago Bulls. You'll say, how can the guy who owns the Bulls be a terrible owner? Didn't they have Michael Jordan? What have the Bulls done since Michael Jordan left? Absolutely nothing. They got lucky with Derrick Rose, drafted him. He blew out his ACL. They've done nothing but be mediocre every year since, and they just dine on the fact that Michael Jordan played for their franchise and have done nothing to build a competitive winner since then. Same with the Chicago White Sox. This White Sox team a few years ago, I really liked when they had Tim Anderson and Jose Abreu, and I thought this was one of the best up-and-coming teams in the American League, and I thought they had so much young talent. Eloy Jimenez, Luis Robert. It felt like the White Sox were coming. Michael Kopech. They got Garrett Crochet. Like, it felt like they had so much talent on their roster. Has been completely drained. It's been completely destroyed. Either the confidence, the play of their players has been destroyed, or they walked, or they were traded. Like, this whole thing by the Chicago White Sox has been just disgusting. And then after the White Sox, we play another disgusting team in the Miami Marlins, who felt like they were finally having some sort of direction, kind of building towards something. The Marlins are kind of like the Sacramento Kings of Major League Baseball, because the Kings decided to fire their head coach, Mike Brown, after finally becoming a decent team in National Basketball League, right? In the National Basketball Association. It was like, the Kings are actually good now. Maybe they're not championship level good, but it's like, the Kings should at least be in the second round, or potentially in the second round of the postseason. They should at least win, 47 to 50 games, right? The Kings felt like a good team finally. Then they blew it all up this season for no reason. The Marlins, a couple years ago, they had their GM Kim, who was building this roster, acquired Jake Berger, Josh Bell at the deadline. They made the postseason. Then they fired her, and they just completely destroyed this team ever since firing their GM. And so it's like, the D-backs, your season is going to come down to whether you could beat the Colorado Rockies, who are an unserious franchise, who had a manager there for 20 years who was terrible. They have a terrible owner. Same with the Chicago White Sox, terrible owner, a team that has destroyed their talent base over the last few years as well. And then the trifecta, the Miami Marlins. The common theme, terrible ownership across the board. They don't know how to build a winner. They don't spend money on building a winner. And that's why the D-backs have to go into these series and destroy these teams. Those teams are bad for baseball and bad for sports. Those owners are just trying to make a profit, just trying to be in the plus side of the revenue every year and not really try to build a winner. The D-backs have showed you we can't spend the same total amount of the Dodgers, but we can spend at the same rate as the Dodgers. And so we need to go into these series and beat these squads, not just for the D-backs' own record in the standings, but to show you can't do nothing in Major League Baseball and be rewarded for it. And so, yes, all those teams are bad. The D-backs are never a guarantee, but I would be disgusted if the D-backs can't beat the Marlins, the White Sox, or the Colorado Rockies to end June and get back in the postseason mix. If you can't beat those three teams, you don't deserve to make the playoffs in 2025. And now we'll preview Game 2 against the Blue Jays and discuss if Erod can keep the momentum going in segment number 3. But first, I want to talk to you guys about Monarch Money, because ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. All right, back here on the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Let's read a couple comments. Sean said, Miller needs to bounce his splitters if you can't locate right below the zone. I don't disagree with you, Sean. Miller this year has been like, the numbers on paper, you would look at it, you'd be like, oh my God, Shelby Miller's having a dominant season for Arizona. Like, let me see, what is his ERA after today? Shelby's still at a 2.17. So despite recording one out and giving up 2 home runs, he's still got a 2.17 ERA. So if you look at the numbers, you'd be like, oh my God, Shelby Miller's been dominant this season for Arizona. But watching him game to game, you know, this guy likes to put traffic on the bases. This guy likes to give up some hard contact, some loud outs. And a lot of times it's like, there's a man on first and third. The tying run is coming up to the plate, and Shelby Miller gets a fly ball to Lourdes Gurriel for the D-backs win. Somehow we have escaped so many potential losses with Shelby Miller. And so tonight did not surprise me, because I have not been super confident in Shelby Miller all year, at least as a closer. When he comes in the 7th, 8th inning, I love Shelby. But Shelby as a closer, I'm not a huge fan of. And for the D-backs to get back in this series in game number 2, they're going to need Erod to really step up and keep his momentum going from his last 2 starts. I'm always kind of dubious or a little scared where if you get walked off in the fashion like you did last night, will that like hurt the team the next day? Like mentally, will the guys like show up, or are they still going to be like a little bit sad? Are they going to be a bunch of sad boys out there because they were 1 inning away from taking home a victory? But of course, it was the bullpen again, not doing their job. But watching this team in 2025, I would like to believe we're going to see resiliency out the D-backs tomorrow. Maybe it's crazy to say, but I do feel like the D-backs have been resilient in 2025. Despite the bullpen and their meltdowns, this offense has always had comebacks. The answer backs, I think, have been pretty legitimate this year. We've seen them a ton in June, right, with the insane comebacks against the Braves in the 9th inning, against the San Diego Padres in the 9th inning, the grand slam and extras against the Seattle Mariners. So we know this D-backs team is incredible at making comebacks. And so going to this game tomorrow, I would like to believe the D-backs have the resiliency to bounce back in game number 2. And they're going to have to do it against Eric Lauer, who is not the sexiest name as a starter, very Nick Martinez-esque, a guy who's going to pitch a few innings, but not really a true starter. long reliever at times, a spot starter at times, and that's kind of his role in game 2 tomorrow. He's a lefty starter who will probably go a handful of innings, so expect a lot of righties starting for the Dbacks tomorrow. So I would expect no Pavin Smith, who, again, that's probably, that might be helpful for the Arizona Diamondbacks because Pavin Smith has not done a lot for Arizona recently. His strikeout rate is getting out of control. Now, he does still walk a lot, which you do have to love for Pavin Smith. But overall, his numbers, I mean, you look at his last 30 games and he's basically batting 200 with a 620 OPS. And so maybe it's time for Pavin Smith to take a quick little rest on the bench. That never hurt nobody. Let's get a little Randall Grichuk in. Let's get a little Tim Tawa in. I would expect maybe no Alec Thomas either. Let's get the righties in the lineup because they never get to play, and it's sad to see. One guy who I do want to see get going against the lefty is Ketel Marte, because Ketel Marte, in his career, when you look at the numbers, he has crushed left-handed pitching. Career 306 average and an 897 OPS against lefties. Prior to this year, you can make the argument over the last 4 or 5 years, Aaron Judge is number 1, and then Ketel Marte is number 2 best hitter against left-handed pitching in Major League Baseball. But in 2025, this is the craziness of a switch hitter. In 2025, Ketel Marte has completely flipped his career splits. 318 average and over 1,000 OPS against righties, but only a 220 average and a 719 OPS against lefties. I'm hoping this game against Eric Lauer could be the start of Ketel Marte getting going against left-handed pitching, because in his career against Lauer, Marte has really thrived. 7 for 17 with 2 home runs off Lauer in his career. This could be the game where Marte gets his stuff going against lefties. Best believe I'm going on FanDuel and dropping a few shekels down on my boy Marte to get a couple of hits. Also hoping this could be a game where Geraldo Perdomo gets going, because we know he's been in a little bit of a slump. May, honestly, you look at Geraldo Perdomo, May wasn't bad for Perdomo. It was just June. It just been June. In May, Perdomo still batted 309 with an 843 OPS, so it probably felt bad in May. Maybe it was more toward the end of May. But in June so far, that's where Perdomo has struggled. He has a sub-200 average, a 610 OPS in the month of June. I'm hoping for a guy who has crushed left-handed pitching this season, 360 average, 900 OPS against lefties. This could be a game where Ketel gets going with his career numbers against Lauer, and Perdomo gets going with his numbers this season against lefties. We need to see the offense have a monster day to support their starter, Erod, who kind of is a copycat version of Eric Lauer. When you look at the stats side by side for Lauer and Erod, both average the same fastball velocity, and they both have the same usage on their fastball. You look at the breakdown of their arsenal and the type of pitches they throw and the usage of their pitches, they're kind of almost like the same pitcher. The difference is Lauer's fastball is super effective. Lauer in 2025 is giving up a sub 100 average on his fastball with an expected batting average of 139 and a slug of 109. His four-seamer has been dominant this year despite averaging 92 miles an hour. Erod, however, not the same case. His fastball is getting hit for over a 300 average in 2025. But over his last 2 starts, it's gotten a lot better. His most recent start, the fastball, only a 143 average allowed. 2 hits in 15 plate appearances against his fastball in his most recent start. And so maybe Erod is starting to turn the corner a little bit, because, of course, he's a guy we're paying a lot of money to. And with Corbin Burnes out the rotation, Erod is someone that has to keep this momentum going. Like we said, with Fott not having the longest start in game 1 of the series, and the bullpen already being used a lot. Backus, Beeks, Thompson, Murillo, Shelby, we saw the whole crew in game number 1. So that means, what do we need from you, Erod? We're going to need a start like you had last time, because Erod looked fantastic in his most recent start. 5.1 innings pitch, or excuse me, not 5.1 innings pitch, 6.1 innings pitch, 2 earned runs. He pitched into the 7th against Seattle. We need one of those starts again for Erod, because if he does not go deep in tomorrow's game, I'm not feeling too trustworthy in a Dbacks pen. trying to record multiple innings and multiple outs. It has not looked good recently. Has not looked good in 2025. So Erod, can you step up with your $20 million salary? We'll see tomorrow. That's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Dose it.